A business went to the city of Mesquite to get a business license to open an office building on the north end of the freeway on the frontage road. The only problem was that when the business opened its doors, it was not an office building. It turned out to be an adult bookstore called the Pure Pleasure Adult Bookstore. The owner of the facility had indicated that his plan was to fill Utah, Arizona, and Nevada with pornography. He's quoted as having said that his plan was to start with the adult bookstore, expand to live dancing, and then eventually open a brothel. And the concern was that once this facility was allowed to develop and be successful, that it would expand along the I-15 corridor and enter southern Utah and other areas. An organization was established called HOME. The acronym was Help Our Moral Environment. The Mesquite Stake began to rally its resources to begin to picket the facility that was opened under false pretenses, and they asked the St. George area to assist them in their efforts. Sometime later, we were in a bishop's council with President Gray Larkin, who explained the circumstances and asked for the assistance of the wards in fighting against this facility that had been opened down the street, which we believed would be expanding into southern Utah and the surrounding areas. It was kind of interesting as we're sitting in this meeting. President Larkin asks, "Now, we're not exactly sure what the parking facilities are like. Do any of you are aware of what parking is like?" And all of the bishops look at each other and start laughing, as though, hopefully none of us had been there. And if we did, nobody was going to confess to having been there. But that began a multi-year saga where the local stakes began a picketing process of this facility in an effort to try to prevent the spread of this filth from being expanded throughout the area. I remember thinking that I'd never been involved with picketing before. First time, I think, for many of the people in our ward and stake and region, it was a first for them as well. And there were specific rules. You couldn't get on private property, you had to stay on public streets. It's interesting that the Oasis Casino was opposed and had provided parking on a vacant lot next door. And we would, our shift, as I remember, we would start about 8 o'clock in the evening, and we would stay there until about 2 o'clock in the morning, at which we'd drive home up through the gorge. That was a mighty long drive back home in the middle of the night. We would have pizzas delivered, have hot chocolate. We were there 24/7 for over 2 years. Well, I remember as this event drug on and on, there were court challenges. Initially, the courts basically prohibited communities from outright outlawing these kinds of facilities from being introduced in their community. But they could create zoning that restricted where they could go. And I think throughout the region, most every city went and revised their zoning code. And in most cases, these places were only permitted in industrial parks well away from the retail areas of the community. And the owner was very boisterous and I think had some of the industry support to try to help peddle some of these things over the long-term period. I remember the many hours that we would sit and be involved with the picketing. One evening, having a strong impression that the adversary had a strong hold in the pornography industry, and that with the change of technology, and keep in mind in the 1990s, especially 93 through 95, the internet was very limited. The technology was nowhere near what it has evolved into becoming. But I had an insight that as the technology improved, as virtual reality became a more of a technological reality, that this would unleash a menace to society, that kids who began to be involved with the virtual games, both the violent military type games as well as the games that or the pornography that had more of a sexual orientation, that it would create a situation where the people would have a difficult time from distinguishing from fantasy to reality, and that it would result in the acting out on many fronts. As we look today, we're seeing all kinds of mass shootings, and I suspect that it's going to be worse as the technology and the three-dimensional imagery becomes more capable of being readily accessible to the common public. It's going to be a real problem. At the time this happened, I was the bishop. Over the process of time, I was called into the stake presidency and would go down routinely once a month and do our shift on the picket line. Early summer of 1995, we were down doing a picketing, and I was visiting with Bishop Jim Slomboski, and it had been over 2 years now, and as far as I can remember, it was the longest ongoing 24/7 picket that had been recorded to that time. And we were visiting, and Bishop Slomboski asked, "I wonder if anyone has thought to use the priesthood to assist in the demise of this facility." Well, we discussed this for a little bit, and as far as we knew, no one had. And the question is, well, I wonder why not? Well, we pondered this through the remainder of our shift, and when our shift ended at 2 o'clock in the morning, and some local folks came and relieved us from our shift on the picket line, we walked around the hill, or drove around the hill, walked up on top of a hill, looking down over the facility, and we felt impressed that it would be appropriate to call upon the power of God using the priesthood to put an end to this vile facility and the wicked people who were a part of it. And so, standing on that hillside at 2 a.m. in the morning, I raised my hand to the square, called upon the powers of God in the name of the Holy Priesthood, and asked through the priesthood that this facility would be wiped from the face of the earth, and the wicked people who were the instigators of this would be duly and appropriately punished. Bishop Slomboski followed and did the same, and I don't remember the language that we each specifically said. I know Bishop Slomboski recorded it in his journal, and I foolishly did not. Well, the next morning we get up and we're looking to see if lightning had struck. We were pretty sure that something bad was going to happen to this place, and it didn't. But the interesting thing, and I guess this helps to understand the way and the ways of the Lord, is that within 30 days, that facility was completely gone. There was no evidence that it had ever been there, or at least very, very compelling evidence that it had ever been there. The owner of the facility, who was a convicted sex offender, had died of AIDS. The courts had ruled in a favorable way for the communities, and the ordeal and saga was over. This became a testimony building experience for me. I began to realize that we have the priesthood not only to bless those who are in need of blessings, but to protect us from the powers and the influences of the adversary. And I suspect that that is a element or aspect of the priesthood that goes underutilized as we fight the powers and the adversaries' influence in our societies, that the priesthood is a power that can help us in that fight. I know that God lives. I hope that my posterity will know that their father and grandfather made an effort to fight against the adversarial influences against society, and that we need to be vigilant in order to stop these vile things that can have such a negative influence on society.